Hello and welcome to my YouTube channel. In just 2 weeks, I finished a pair of socks. It wasn't exactly 2 weeks. Originally, I started this pair of socks over a year ago, and when I finally was done with one, I really wanted to try the toe-up method for the socks of my partner. But since you guys liked that video so much, I was very motivated to also show you the classic way of knitting socks that even your grandma would agree with. So I made the second sock of the long dismissed pair and filmed every step for you. This version is very classic and standard, and I tried to explain it as good and simple as possible, so I hope that this video will actually help you. Besides the one pair of toe-to-cuff socks that I did, or toe-up socks that I did, this is the technique that I always used before on socks. In my other knitting video, somebody asked if I maybe could also make a video with a magical loop, but since one of the socks was already done, I had to use the same wool, and I simply didn't have a magic loop in that size, so I'm very sorry. Maybe this is something for the future that I can do. Still, I encourage you to give this a try, even if it's a little bit intimidating at the beginning with several needles in your hands, because it's really not as hard as it looks. And with that, I would say let's start into the video, into our pair of socks. Let's go.
While knitting this sock, I wasn't at home this time, I was in Hedalen. I found a new favorite spot here, so don't be surprised if the table looks a little different in this video. The yarn I used is something I found on Amazon. It's designed to create a beautiful pattern without having to switch between different balls of yarn. You will find a link in the video description. For this yarn, I'm using 5 3mm double pointed needles. Let's start with the cast on. I place the yarn across my palm, wrap it around my index finger, and then form a figure 8 around my index finger and thumb. Both ends of the yarn point downwards and I hold them in place with my ring and little finger. I like to cast on using 2 needles together so the stitches aren't too tight and it's easier to knit into them later. For socks, I like to knit one size bigger just in case. So instead of a size 38, I knitted a size 40-41. Which means I need to cast on 64 stitches. You can check how many stitches you will need for your size on the chart shown here. And don't worry, whenever we need the chart again for another part of the sock in the video, I will of course put it again on the screen for you. Once we have the number of stitches we need, I remove one of the needles. Carefully. Now it's time to start knitting the cuff. To get a nice stretchy cuff, I knit 1 purl stitch and 1 knit stitch alternately. Since this is the first round and all my stitches are still on 1 needle, I have to count carefully. I have a total of 64 stitches, so after this round I want to have 4 needles with 16 stitches each. So I work 16 stitches purl knit, then pick up a new needle and do the same again and so on until there are no stitches left on my starting needle. When that's done, we move on to round 2. Here, the first and the last needle need to be joined together. Important, try not to leave a gap between the needles. Keep a bit of tension on your yarn to close it neatly. Now that the needles are successfully connected, I can simply continue knitting purl and knit stitches alternately until the cuff is the length I want. Once I have reached the length I want for the cuff, I stop alternating purl and knit stitches and switch to knitting every stitch. I keep knitting like this until I get to the heel. How long you knit before starting the heel is really up to you. If you prefer shorter socks, you can even begin the heel right after the cuff if you like. Now I'm ready to start the heel. Like I mentioned earlier, I like my socks to be very long. So everything you see here is just because I personally prefer them this way. For the heel, I first need to figure out which needles are needle 1 and needle 4. To do that, I look at the cuff of the sock to find where my working yarn is. That's where I started the sock. I like to pull this yarn up and place it between needle 1 and needle 4 to mark my starting point. So here we have needle 1, needle 2, needle 3 and needle 4. Needle 1 and needle 4 will become our heel needle. For this, I want all the stitches from those two needles on one single needle. So I knit the stitches from needle 1 onto needle 4. Now we have needles 1 and 4 combined onto one needle, and we won't need needles 2 and 3 for a while. I turn the sock and knit one stitch, then purl across the row. The very last stitch on the needle is knitted again. Then I turn the work and simply knit back across. I keep knitting back and forth like this until I have the right number of heel flap rows according to the chart. Personally, I like to mark every 5th row with the yarn I used earlier to mark the spot between needles 1 and 4. Now I have finished my 30 heel flap rows. Next, I divide the stitches on my heel needle into 3 sections. Since 32 stitches don't divide evenly into 3, I counted 11 stitches for each side and 10 stitches for the middle. The important thing is that the 2 side sections have the same number of stitches. I marked these 2 sections again using the yarn I had earlier as a marker. Now it's time to start the heel turn. I knit across until just before the second marker. In my case, that's 20 stitches, so there's 1 stitch left before the marker. When I reach that stitch, I simply slip it onto my needle without knitting it. Then I knit the stitch after the marker and pass the slipped stitch over the knitted one. I turn the work, slip the first stitch, then purl across until there's 1 stitch left before the other marker. Here, I insert my needle through the stitch before the marker and through the stitch after the marker at the same time and purl them together. When I turn the work again, you will see 2 visible gaps. So now we don't need the marking yarn anymore, we just look at the gaps. Now I knit across until 1 stitch before the gap, slip that stitch, knit the stitch after the gap, and pass the slipped stitch over the knitted one again. Turn the work, slip the first stitch, purl all the way back, and when you reach the next gap, purl the stitch before and after the gap together. I keep repeating this process until there are no stitches left after the gaps, or ideally just 1 neat section of stitches in the middle of the heel. This is what it looks like now. Next, we need to pick up the stitches along the sides of the heel flap. If we look at the inside of the heel flap, we can see these little bumps along the edge. Those are the chain-like edges from slipping the first stitch of each row. These are what we will knit into to pick up our stitches. I start at the top and pick up one stitch in each bump along the side. To avoid a hole between the heel stitches and the stitches on the next needle, I also pick up one extra stitch through the little V. You can see that here in the orange yarn, right at the corner. I repeat the same process on the other side of the heel. Ideally, you use the same needle that already holds your heel stitches. I personally like to use a spare needle to pick up the stitches first and then slide them onto my heel needle afterwards. Now when we count the stitches, we will notice we have way more than the original 16 stitches per needle. That's okay, this is where the gusset decreases come in. First, I check that the two heel needles have the same number of stitches. To do that, I simply knit until the stitch counts match. Time for the decreases. We do these at the end of needle 1 and at the beginning of needle 4. It's basically just knitting 2 stitches together. Let me show you. I knit until I'm at the last 2 stitches on needle 1. Then I insert my needle through both stitches at the same time and knit them together. After that, we finally get to knit across needle 2 and 3 again. And from now on, we won't be turning the work for purl rows anymore. When I reach the start of needle 4, I again insert my needle through the first 2 stitches at the same time and knit them together. Then I simply knit the rest of the heel stitches. From here, I knit 2 full rounds without decreases, just plain knit stitches. Then I do another decrease round as shown before, then 2 plain rounds again, and so on until I am back to 16 stitches per needle. Once we are back to 16 stitches per needle, I just keep knitting every stitch until I reach the desired foot length without the toe section. You can either keep trying the sock on and knit until you reach the point where your foot starts to narrow, or use a measuring tape and follow the length chart for your size. Now the foot is the right length, so it's time to start shaping the toe. I begin again with needle 1. The decreases happen at the end of needle 1, the start of needle 2, the end of needle 3, and the start of needle 4. I do these decreases every third round. If you want a rounder toe, you can decrease in every round, but then you should make the foot a little longer before starting the decreases. Here's the sequence. On needle 1, knit until you have 3 stitches left, then knit 2 together and knit the last stitch normally. On needle 2, knit 1 stitch, then knit the next 2 stitches together through the back loop, a twisted decrease, and finish the rest of the needle in knit stitches. On needle 3, repeat what you did on needle 1. Knit until 3 stitches remain, knit 2 together, then knit 1. On needle 4, repeat what you did on needle 2, knit 1, then knit the next 2 together through the back loop, and then knit the rest. After that decrease round, knit 2 rounds without any decreases. Then repeat the decrease round. Continue this pattern until you have 6 stitches on each needle. From that point on, decrease every round, still in the same positions, until you have just 2 stitches left on each needle. This helps avoid a too pointy toe. Once you have reached 2 stitches per needle, your sock is almost done. Grab a sewing needle with a large eye or a yarn needle. Cut your yarn with a generous tail and thread it through the needle. Now carefully slip all the stitches off your knitting needles and onto the yarn needle. Then pull the yarn tight to close the toe. Push the remaining yarn tail through the tip of the sock and turn the sock inside out. All that's left is to weave in those loose ends at the beginning and the end of the sock, and anywhere in between if you used more than one ball of yarn. And that's it, one finished sock. Now just make a second one, and you're all set.
I hope you ended up with a pair of socks as well, or maybe at least with some motivation for your next knitting project. If you want to make a step away from the classic technique, make sure to also check out the other toe up video that I uploaded that many people think is easier, or maybe you are up for watching any of the other videos that I already uploaded. Otherwise, I might see you next week in the next video. Thank you so much for watching. Take care and goodbye. Ha det på badet, den gamle chokolade.